Hello guys, welcome to the HTML crash course for beginners. In this video, we will learn how to build forms on a website using the HTML form element. My name is Kafui and welcome to my channel mot.dev. Please subscribe, like and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I release a content on the channel. With that said, let's get started. The HTML form element is used to collect user data that can be submitted to a server for processing. So if you want to build a form on your website, we use what? The HTML form element. So the HTML form element goes like this. I'll write form and then close it, and then emit does the auto completion for me. So this is the opening tag and this is the closing form tag. So in between the opening and closing form tag is where we put in our input fields and then our labels. So we'll look into that later. Now the form element has the action attribute. So I'll just go ahead and write action. Now the value we provide to the action attribute specifies the URL where the form data will be sent upon submission. So mostly you put in the location or the URL to your backend server. So I'll just use server.php as an example here. Another attribute we can provide is the method attribute. The method attribute defines the HTTP method to be used when submitting the form. So whether a get request or a post request. So I'll just go ahead and then choose a post request. So we are not going to submit any form here. I'm just using this to explain to you the attributes that we can put on the form element. Now, in between the opening and closing form element is when we put in our labels and then our input fields. So first of all, let's talk about labels. The label element associates a caption with a form field or an input field. So I can put in a label here using the label tag, and then it has the for attribute which we'll talk about later. So in between the opening and closing tag of the label, I'll just put in, for instance, let's say name, and then save. When I save that, we see this name label here or caption here. So now let's talk about the input fields. So in order to collect user data, we use what? The input fields. So I'll just go ahead and write the input and then close it. It's a self-closing tag. So you see, upon just putting in this input tag here or this input element here, we see this box here. So I can type in something into this box. Now the input element has a lot of attributes. So the first one we'll talk about is the type attribute. So the type attribute specifies the type of input element we want to use in collecting our data in the form. So the first one we'll talk about is called the text, the input type of text. So I'll just go ahead and write the type here, and then you see that with auto completion, or you see that the text editor is giving us a lot of what? Suggestions. So you see we have a lot of input types here, input field types here. We have the button, checkbox, color. So we'll look at some of them that we'll use mostly in our website. So the first one we'll talk about is the text. So I'll just go ahead and write text, and when I save, nothing changes about this box here. It still looks the same, but the text input field displays a text box into which the user types in a line of text. So I can come and then click inside this box, and then I'll just enter a name, let's say John, and then it is there. Now let's see how we can connect this label to this input field, or how we can tell the browser that this name label here belongs to what, or to be linked to this text input field. So that's when we put in the ID attribute here, and then the value we provide to this ID attribute should be the same value we provide to the for attribute of the label. So I'll just put in an ID of, let's say, name, and then the for attribute here, I'll just put in the same value of what? Name, and save. So now this label here is linked to this text input box. So when I go ahead and click on this label, so I'll click on the name label here, you see that the input box has been focused by default. So that is how we can link labels to what? Input fields. So the value you provide to the for attribute here should be the same value you provide to the ID attribute of the input field, and by so doing they are linked together. Now the next input field we'll talk about, or the next input type we'll talk about, is the email input type. So I'll just go ahead and write another label, and then I'll put here the value of email and then the content or the caption of email. Then I'll write input, and then this one I'll write email, and then save. So we have another input box. Let me just zoom in. Okay, what I'll do is I'll put all the input fields into a div element. So I'll just cut this one here and paste it in this div, and then cut this one and then put them into a div so that they will all appear on separate lines for us. So by so doing, they are now on separate line. Even though there are no spaces between them, I think it's okay for this video. So the next one is the email. So in order to connect this label or this caption to this email input box or input field, I have to write the ID attribute here and write the same value of what email and save. So by so doing, when I click on this email, this input field gets what focused by default, and I can write in what the email. The next input field we'll talk about is the password input field. So I'll just go ahead and first of all write a div and then write a label. So yeah, I'll write in a value of password and then the content or the caption of password, and then the input field I'll write password and save, and then the ID of what password. Then I'll save this. So we have this password input field for us. So when I type in random text here or my password, you see them appearing as what dot for us. So for security reasons, this is how password appear by default in what HTML when we use the input field password. Now the next text field we'll talk about is the text area. This element displays a text box in which the user can type in multiple lines of text. So unlike the text field whereby you can just type in just few lines of text, if you want to type in multiple lines of text, so I'll just put in a label here of, let's say, message, and then write in a message caption here. So in order to put in, or you want to enable the user to put in multiple lines of text, you use the text area tag. It has a lot of attributes that will, so the column attributes here just talks about the number of columns, same as the rows, the number of rows to be displayed. Then the name attribute here also is used for identification reasons. So if you want to submit, when you are submitting the form to your backend, this name attribute will be used to identify the text area here, and we can put the name attribute on the input fields too as well. So over here I'm interested in the ID, so I'll just go ahead and write the same value of message, and when I save, we have this text box here whereby we can write in a lot of what text. So that is it about the text area. Now let's say we want to submit the form. How do we submit it? So we need a button to click on to submit the form. So we can define a button using the button element. So I'll just go ahead and write button, and then the text here I'll just say submit for the text or the content of the button, and when I save, we have this button here. But when I click on it, you see that it's trying to submit to our server, but we don't have that server, so we are getting error. So you should always put in a type attribute for the button, and you should put in a type of what submit to tell the browser to that whenever this button is clicked, it will submit the form. So you should always put in a type of submit. Another way you can build a button is using the input field, and then here you put in a type of submit, and then you add the value attribute, and then the value is what should be displayed as a text. So when I save it, you get this button as well that we can use to submit the form. So it's either you go this way or you go this way, and you can style all this using CSS. Now let's go to MDN. So I'll go to MDN web docs here. So this input field, so we have a lot of input fields that we can work with. So we have the button, we have the checkbox, we have the color, the date, the date time, email, file, hidden. A lot of them are here that we can work with. We have the radio button, we have the range that we can work with, the submit, the text that we have already sent. So depending on what you want, I'll advise you, or I'll encourage you that you should go to MDN, and then you can go through the documentation and get access to the input field and how you can use it. Now, another one element I want us to discuss is the select element. This select element represents a control for selecting among a lot of or a list of options. So we've been visiting website. I'll just go here to the top over here. I'll put in another div and then put in a label of, let's say, select a country, and then when I save, you should see this label here. Now in that same div, I'll write the select element and then put in an ID of, let's say, country, for example, and put here country so that they will be linked. Now in the select element here, in between the opening and closing tag is where we put in our options. So I'll use the options, the option tag or the option element, and then specify my options. So maybe the first country is US, then another option, let me write that so that I use auto completion. Another option, let's say we have India, and then another option, then we have what, Canada. So these are our countries. So you see that we have this select box here, and then the value attribute is where we put in the value for what, these options. So I'll just put in here US, and then the value here will be India, and this will be handled by what, the back end. So here will be Canada, and then save. So we have our select box here. So I can put in an empty option here and then make that one default. So I'll just put in a text and say, please select a country, and then when I save that, we have this one here. I think maybe it's not showing properly. Let me go ahead and comment these ones out. Good, and save, so that we see the select box here. So you see that when I click on it, we have these options that we can click or select from. So you can make an option selected by default. So I can put in, not this, when I can put in an attribute of selected here to make the US selected by default. So after saving, you see that US is selected by default. So that's how we can work with what, the select element as well in our form. Now let's look at some other attributes that we can put on an input element. So I'll just go ahead and comment this one out and comment this one quickly, or better still, I'll just copy it out of the comment and then put it here and save. So let's see how, or other attributes that we can put on what, an input field. So we can put in, we have looked at the type and then the ID attribute. We can put in a value attribute, and this value attribute is where we can provide what, an initial value for the input field. So I can put in an initial value of Bob here, and when I save, you see it appearing there. Let me comment the select out quickly so that we work with only the text, and I think I should comment out the buttons as well. Now, good. So we can put in what, an initial value using the value attribute. Another attribute we can put on an input field is the placeholder attribute. So the placeholder attribute displays a hint or an example of the value that the input field expects. So since this is where we have to put in our name, so I'll just go ahead and then do away with this value attribute. I'll just put in a hint of this, enter a name, or enter a username, and then save. So you see enter a username here. When I click here and start typing something, it disappears. But when I don't have any text in it, it displays a hint to tell us that here we have to enter what, a username. Another attribute that we can provide is the required attribute. So the required attribute makes the input field mandatory. So I'll just put in a required attribute here, and then this one is what, a boolean attribute. So it's either true or false. So when you put it here, it means it is true. So with when you put this required attribute on an input field, it makes it mandatory. So a user cannot submit a form without filling in a text. So let me comment out this button, or comment this button in quickly. or let me just copy it as well and then take it out of the comment so that we see it. When I save, when I click submit, you see this info given to us that please fill out this field. So we cannot submit this field without what? Putting in a text. So when I put in a random text and then I click, it is what? Good to go. So that's how we can use the required attribute in HTML to ensure validation in our form. So that's all for this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section for discussion. Please subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I release a content on the channel. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.